I will try to explain what this means in these 55 minutes. I am very grateful to the organizer for the invitation to present to this audience new quantitative approaches applied to the history of science. The range of application of these methods is of course very broad and very diverse, and I will not be able to cover all the variety of approaches, neither I will be able to give justice to the many critical elements of these tools. But what I will do is to focus on some specific approaches of the emerging research field called computational history of science. This is a very new branch of the history of science that is rapidly growing. While still marginal and of course controversial in some respects, its relevance within the landscape of the international history of science has sensibly increased in the last few years, as it is showed by the fact that it has been the topic of the focus session of the mainstream journal in the history of science, ISIS. Do you hear me, or I need the microphone? It's okay? So the talk is organized as follows. I will start with a historiographical introduction in which I situate the computational history of science within the disciplinary frameworks of the history of science, of course, digital humanities and quantitative history. I will then quickly review some computational methodologies in the humanities that are particularly relevant to the field of the history of science in two areas, data modeling and network analysis. I will then present the framework of the socio-epistemic networks my colleagues and I have been developing for addressing specific questions of relevance to the history of science. I will finally present some results and application of this framework to the case studies of the history of general relativity, in particular trying to address the problem of the process called the renaissance of general relativity, namely the return to the mainstream of physics of general relativity after a 30-year period of stagnation between the mid-1920s and mid-1950s. I will then conclude with some remarks. So let me say right away that these methods have sparked huge and several worries within the humanities scholarship. Computational approach, like any other methods, are not neutral and should be handled with care, as they might lead to very misleading conclusions. Moreover, they might have far-reaching conceptual and the epistemological consequences we will not understand yet. However, most historians of science who are using these methods, including me, are aware of the possible perils of the misuse of computational techniques and promoted a mixed approach that tries to combine computational techniques with other methods of the historian's toolkit in a complementary fashion. Whatever our personal predisposition toward digital technologies, they are so widespread now, and they will be even more widespread in the future, that they are deeply affecting our scholarship practices anyway. Both the ideological position against these methods or an uncritical embracement of that should be avoided. They are very dangerous. While a better understanding and careful employment of these methods can do much for the field of the history of science in the future. And this is my personal understanding of this. It's clear that there's still much to be done in order to integrate quantitative and qualitative methods and to fully open the black boxes of computational techniques. So the current rise of computational history of science is a consequence of a wide radical transformation in the way information is stored, accessed, and transferred. An article published in 2011 in Science showed how the greatest amount, by far, of stored information is in the digital form now. One of the authors has even proposed to define the beginning of the digital age in the early 2000s, when digital storage started becoming much larger than analog storage. Like many other human activities, our scholarly profession has now become almost unthinkable without computers, PDFs, search engines, online journals, digital databases, and so on and so forth. This is a phenomenon certainly not limited to the history of science, not even history, but it's the entire range of humanities which is affected. As American historian Lincoln Mullen wrote in 2010, we are all digital humanities now. But the threat of our computational history of science is not simply, nor uniquely, the inevitable integration of history of science and digital humanities. There is a second trend which flows into the computational approach, and this is what is called the second wave of quantitative history. The first wave, as you know, had its apogee in the 1970s when quantitative methodologies became mainstream in historical research in connection with renewed interest in socio-economic histories, comparative approaches, and long-durée perspectives, all areas which were strongly promoted and shaped by the announced schools of historiography. After an initial enthusiasm toward these methods, the first wave of quantitative history, known as New Social History, encountered a series of substantial criticism in the 1980s, when many saw that quantitative approaches were not providing what they were supposed to do, while they were extremely expensive and dragged away resources from other historical projects. English historians Lawrence Stone expressed this disillusionment toward quantitative history this way. Many scholars use the most sophisticated techniques either to prove the obvious or to claim to prove the implausible, using formula and language which render the methodology unverifiable to the ordinary historians. Many of the criticisms raised at the time are still important today, but the widespread accessibility of computational facilities and the digitalized historical sources are enormously improved the feasibility of data-driven quantitative approaches, and this has given new hope that data-driven computational intensive methods can revive the historians' ambition to investigate and understand long-term long-durée processes, against the trend of the last 30 years of focusing on local practices characterizing much of the scholarship. Also, quantitative approaches are not applied only to big data projects, but also to microhistory as well. With the correct use of statistical sampling and careful assessment of data availability, each scholar can successfully apply quantitative methods to small but indicative samples that might reveal historical and under-recognized patterns. So I'll now briefly review a selection of computational methods in the area of data modeling and network analysis. Data retrieval is, of course, one of the biggest challenges of computational history of science. There is no standard way to keep and store data, and each project has its own data repository, its own data, the data collected in ways that are strongly dependent on very specific questions of the projects. So the lack of standards makes this data difficult to utilize in subsequent analysis. So to become more effective, computational approaches need standardized ways to model digital data. A relatively recent method developed to overcome these difficulties consists of building semantic models of data in machine-readable specifications. For semantic data modeling, one means a process of software engineering to present the data in a logical way by giving semantic information to the data. This modeling allows for an automatic machine query or retrieval of meaningful data. So the most common of the employed machine-readable specification is the RDF, Resource Description Framework, which is a family of abstract specification based on the logic of the triple: subject, predicate, object. And this is the unit of an analysis on most RDF. This is a trivial example of what I mean. In the slide you can see a semantic model based on the RDF triple, subject, predicate, object, where one triple, for example, Einstein is a physicist, it becomes a subject of another triple, and data might be constructed this way. But such semantic models need also reference models, which are internationally standardized conceptual frameworks for the description of information. The most common reference framework for semantic models of historical data has become the SIDOC CRM, namely the Conceptual Reference Model developed by the International Committee for Documentation. And this has been done for the description of cultural detached documentation. That has been amplified by integrating it with the functional requirements of bibliographical data, and this is meant to become the standard reference model for the description of the underlying semantic of bibliographical of the libraries and museum information. And this is the standards most of us are using these days. To give you an example in the history of science of this kind of data modeling, I show you Very briefly, the database corpus tracer created by Florian Kreutri and Matteo Valeriano at the Max Planck Institute for the History of Science. This has been done for the project The Sfera, which investigates the historical changes over 5 centuries of the commentary tradition of the 13th century university textbook, The Sfera of Johannes II Bosco. So the data about each book in their 350, more or less, corpus of treatises are stored in tripos in LDF and modeled through the side of CRM. The semantic data model captures here this is a model that captures the information of each treatise as well as the individual text they contain. Now, once captured in standardized and much readable forms, data can be visualized and analyzed in multiple ways, depending, of course, on the historical questions one wants to address. There is no doubt that one of the most used computational methods in the history of science is based on notions, concepts, tools of network theory. With network theory, one means, of course, the branch of mathematics called graph theory, which investigates the relation between discrete objects, but also its enormous range of application in physics, biology, engineering, computer science, economics, sociology, of course. The entities and relations between these entities have been coded in various ways depending on the specific sphere of application. But for simplicity's sake, I will call this the nodes, the entities, and the edges, the relations between them in this topic. Only recently, a new generation of historians has started using formal network analysis tools to investigate historical data. This trend has given rise to a brand new scientific field and a scholarly community which is strongly based on this online platform here, Historical Network Research, and the dedicated journal which has been established in 2017, Journal of Historical Network Research, which aims at bridging the traditional hermeneutics of the historical research with the more technical methods of network analysis. Now, network analysis may be applied to very different branches, but of course one of the main applications which is used in history is the application to sociology called the social network analysis. This is the major conceptual and methodological reference for historical studies, which aims at investigating, for example, the relevance of individuals using centrality measures, community structures or sub-community detection, the distance between actors in a connected component of the groups, and so on and so forth. One widespread application of social network analysis in the history of science, recent history of science, is the analysis of the dynamics of scientific collaboration of authors of papers, namely where the nodes are the authors of scientific publication and the edges are the co-authorship relations between them. Information can be retrievable in online repositories such as Web of Science. The structure and dynamics of co-authorship networks have been a major area of research in many disciplinary branches, including physics, because the availability of data has made such networks relevant case studies for the development of network theory itself. One of the main interests of historians of science in the dynamics of co-authorship network is to study the development of specific parameters that might signal the establishment of specific scientific fields or subfields. One hypothesis, which is very much used in these studies, is that the formation of the largest, I don't know if it works, by the way, the largest connected community of authors might form, and in this case, the assumption is that the great number of scientists is crowd. Oh, that's fantastic. Okay, so when a large community of co-authors is formed, that might signal the formation of scientific fields because there is a great number of scientists which plausibly share such questions, concepts, and tools. Louis Bettencourt and David Kaiser use this approach and hypothesize that the change over time of specific parameters, such as the diameter of the largest connected component, might be used to investigate the formation of scientific field. And this hypothesis working on, by comparing different fields. In brief, they map the diameter this is the ordinate, the diameter of the largest component over the number also of the co-authors in the largest component. And they found a specific shift akin to percolation that might signal the formation of scientific field. Namely, when the diameter stopped growing and even increased while the number of people in the largest component continued to increase, then they claim that might be a signal that the formation of a field has been accomplished. So, the dynamics of social networks is only one of the possible applications of the theory of the complex networks to the history of science. One other important application is the network of the material representation of knowledge, for example, books, papers, and so on. And this is what we call the semiotic network in our framework. And this is equivalent to what physicist Mark Newman called the information of knowledge network. For example, the World Wide Web might be a knowledge network example. So the clearest example of this network in the history of science is the network of citation between academic papers. Beyond the direct past-looking citation network, there are other possible networks that might be investigated in the citation framework, which is the co-citation network, where the connection is created by being cited together by a third paper, or the function opposite, which is the biographical coupling when the papers are connected when they cite the same papers. Of course, the more papers they cite, the more they are connected. These methods have become increasingly relevant in many fields. Actually, they have created fields such as symptomatics and biomedics, but without ignoring the criticism, they may also be useful to the history of science to investigate scientific trends and changes in the 20th century, specific in natural science. A third area of the application of network theory is in the considered a set of notions as expressed by written words. Based on some kind of relations, for example, the fact that they occurred in the same abstract or the same text or the same paragraph, one can build connection between words and can be interpreted as concepts. And when you do that, then you can apply various techniques for understanding what are the most central, of course, what are the cluster of concepts and so on, and how they change in time in a specific corpus. So, usually these three kinds of network, the social, the semantic, and the semiotic, are studied independently of each other to answer a specific question on the social or conceptual dynamics of knowledge production and circulation. What we try to do is to elaborate a framework which is at the same time conceptual and methodological, which aims at analyzing the interrelated dynamics between these different layers of knowledge production and circulation. We call this framework the socio-epistemic network, and the idea is to develop a robust methodology that allows to investigate how the changes in one layer, for example, affect historically the changes in other layers. Of course, the task is formidable, and we don't even have now all the mathematical tools to do that. This requires a mathematical development of the generalization of graph theory called multi-layer network analysis, which is a relatively new branch of complex system research. We try to study or describe in unique formalism the structural dynamics of very different kinds of nodes and very different kinds of relations, both between the layers and within the layers. So while we are still developing the field methodology and can report only some application results to a specific case of the different layers. In this case, I will report our approach of this framework, conceptual framework, but only the separate layers of the social, the semiotic layer, to the history of general relativity. So just let me briefly summarize what is the historical problem. So general relativity is now considered one of the two building pillars of modern physics, but it didn't reach this status soon after the famous confirmation by Eddington in 1990 we will talk about tomorrow. It has convincingly argued that general relativity remained in the marginal theory of little interest to theoretical physicists for 30 years, from the mid-1920s to the mid-1950s, after which it gradually returned to the mainstream of physics. And we want to apply our methodology to understand this passage. What did it mean and how it happened in a more systematic and robust way. To want to give a systematic definition of the Renaissance of general relativity. which is the return to the mainstream of physics after the mid-1950s. So in doing so, we compare our findings with what are the main widespread causal description of the Renaissance phenomenon. One holds that the Renaissance of relativity was a consequence of astrophysical discoveries, serendipitous astrophysical discovery, unexpected. In the 1960s, like quasars, cosmic background, and pulsars, and then it simply meant that it was a result of technological innovation which led to these unexpected discoveries. The second major explanation, which is in contradiction chronologically with the first one, is that the Renaissance of relativity was simply a byproduct of the changing economic and social landscape of physics. More money and physicists going into physics, and then also to the marginal general relativity. So, through the analysis of dynamics of the social network, or the collaboration network of general relativity scholars, my colleagues and I have produced robust evidence, in my opinion, that there was a radical shift in the structure of such networks around 1960, here and here more clearly. The shift is particularly evident in the diagram of the first derivative of the number of edges of the largest component. You can see here that the number of people working on relativity started increasing soon after World War II, but this didn't lead immediately to a change of the largest component. There were still separate groups until the late 1950s, early 1960s, when they started forming what we can call the giant component of people sharing a same conceptual framework and probably the same research question. What is to be underlined that this happened before the discovery of quasars, and so there will be no causal relation. Of course, this might have changed how this continued to grow and which fields were studied, but not the social change seemed to be occurred before this discovery. Sorry. So we then try to understand the same kind of question with the same semiotic layer, using as a proxy the co-cited papers on general relativity research from 47 to 74. The different colors represent different clusters of co-cited papers automatically retrieved with an algorithm. The clusters showed in roughly chronological order from here to here, as you can imagine. And we can interpret this in fairly easy way. And we have tried very different algorithms and very different hypotheses, and those more or less give the same results which is shown here. Namely, there is a first phase, which we still in the low watermark phase of different research agendas, mostly aimed at going beyond general relativity. Then there is a formation of a large, unique, connected component of cited papers. We mostly focus on general relativity itself and prediction of the theory, especially the gravitational waves. And after that, in the 1960s, which are the last three clusters, we see papers connected to specific fields which are mostly on astrophysical and cosmological import. And probably that means that they are related to the discoveries which we made to the astrophysical term. So if we combine our finding in the social layer and our finding in the semiotic layer, we can hypothesize that the Renaissance process was a two-step process. During the first one, a highly connected community of scholars emerged that reconfigured the research agendas on general relativity to focus on general relativity proper, rather than trying to kill it with the unified field theory or quantum theory of gravity. The second step, which we call the astrophysical term, represented a diversification of research agendas of emerging community, which was strongly depending on the discoveries of in the astrophysical domain. So to conclude, I hope that to show in a very impressionistic way some ranges of application of computational history of science. I hope that I convey that there is a strong potential which comes with a full baggage of approaches, tools, open access software programs, as well as many challenges that have to be addressed and solved. In spite of the potentiality, these approaches at the moment still marginal in the history of science, and is, of course, is very much criticized by many scholars. But one of the problems is to understand this method it requires a long period of application. There is a steep learning curve that is of course worrying for practitioners, and there is a justifiable resistance against the view that coding has to be indispensable expertise of historians to keep. I don't embrace this view that it has to be indispensable. In fact, to solve these fundamental problems and make full use of the possibilities these methods, however, offer, research practices and reward systems in the humanities have to be considerably revised. In particular, this sort of projects require a scheme of strong multidisciplinary cooperation, including historians of science, mathematicians, statisticians, physicists, so forth and so on. This is considerably different from the practice of solitary work of the historians of science. In a certain sense, we are talking about little science collaboration similar to the natural science. If successful, this multidisciplinary collaboration, they can find a way to solve challenges, including the full integration of quantitative and qualitative methods, and open the black boxes for all historians. Moreover, computational history of science might contribute significantly to the development of the field itself of multi-level network analysis, providing questions, data, and of course possible approaches as well. If successful, this might be a possible way to solve in practice with the multidisciplinary work together the famous two cultures problem, because it's humanities and quantitative at the same time, and we are not talking about reduction of the humanities to quantitative approaches. And to conclude, this community of historians of science is in a particularly good position to address this problem, because it's quite different from what happens in the history of science in the other parts of the world. So Italian history and physics are for their particular disciplinary integration within the Physics Institute or Natural Science Institute, are in a suitable position to understand the mathematical machineries. They might launch collaboration with their colleagues within the department in physics, but also teach methods for the humanities which are based on physics, like Paolo Rossi has been doing here at the University of Pisa, which means that this is a very good position for contributing to this field. Thank you very much.
We have time for a few questions.
Do you think it will be possible to discover something that in the common literature you don't find? So there is many cases where scientists also play with words to mask the discovery of others, and sometimes the history has a very dark sides in the history of science.
Do you mean priority claims and...
Priority, but also I was thinking about the famous mistake of Fermi on recognition that there was not a new transuranium elements, because they had connection with the groups was very small, 30, 40, 50 people. So I think looking into the data, you can discover something that for humans have also human relations, and, using mathematical analysis of the data, you can discover something mysterious in the history. So
this is of course
to find a case where your approach or the modern approach can discover something that was not known in the book of history of science.
I mean, this is this is of course the ambition. Otherwise, we will not spend much time on that. I mean, what we want what we hope. I mean, in fact, I think that we found already something new. But in general, we have. We will have even more data in the future. There are many approaches, and there is also new machine learning techniques which are now being developed to extrapolate the data in meaningful ways, and then we can hope that these methods might be applied to solve these particular problems, in particular with the enormous field which is the natural language processing. And through this, I didn't talk because there is not much time, but the third area of application is the textual analysis. So there is thousands of possible applications. There is also challenges because there are black boxes to that. I mean, that's the problem. So we cannot lose our historians ability to go to the text and check everything and interpret the text ourselves. But we can have at least a free screening with textual analysis and then see if this corresponds to something new or is simply created by artifacts. There is a strong artifacts problem here, there is no doubt. But you have to go to the original literature and check.
You should find also new things.
Yeah, I mean, that's the things have been found also in the textual analysis, but then you have to check if that's really true or artifact.
One more question?
Two more questions.
Maybe a silly question. How back in time do you think this kind of analysis can be performed? I mean, I would be tempted to extend it as far as possible and find longue durée, even in physics, say. But I don't know if it is serious. I wanted to have your opinion.
It depends on the data format.
Yeah, that's the point.
I mean, as far as I know, it's possible. But I mean, with physics, there is a major problem. Yeah, textual analysis works well or reasonably well with words, but for formula, we are still very far from that. So that's the major problem. But I don't think that the temporal is per se problem. As far as we can have the corpus, which is solid, I mean, more or less complete, or at least a very good sample, and then transform it into machine-readable text. So this is for the words, we can start and do literary perspective. For the formula, I think that we are still very far from that. So that's the major problem for this through physics. But as far as the temporal framework, I think that we can do that as far as there is money to make the PDF, OCR, everything, and apply.
Thank you.
Thank you for the talk. Your research field is digital humanities, they say, is explained in the example of integration or mix of two cultures. To what extent this kind of research can be framed within the so-called third culture, as Charles Peirce said? And the second question is, there is an ontological problem in order to recognize the object you are going to deal with, because modeling is, so to say, an interdisciplinary approach, but there is the problem to recognize the object from a digital point of view. Can you spend some word on these two aspects? Thank you very much.
Wow. But these are difficult questions, of course. I mean, there are. Okay, I can use it. Well, I'm not sure I can address them very well. That's a major problem. But I mean, yeah. I mean, so far I think that these are still to be solved as far as the ontological recognition. But the third culture, we are still not very much in that. But I mean. It's simply that I have to think about that more closely. Sorry.
Okay, so if there is no other question, I think we can proceed with the next speaker. Thank you.